Okay, everybody, we will
I won't be ignoring.
start our meeting this
Public
afternoon,
meeting.
and thank you all for attending who could make it. It's great to see us get a quorum. We get a little anxious when we're looking at the counts, and sincerely appreciate the commitment it takes to be able to show up and take time out of your day and participate. And as you all know, the dialogue or the discussion about community development is an ongoing, evolving topic. You know, so I want especially you new folks on the committee to know that your input's invited, and what we define community development is relative to our mission is what our actions will lay out for us. So there's so much going on out there, and just to really sincerely appreciate that. So let's start over here on this end, and if we could have introductions and run around the table.
Sure. Christy Silskar, City of Fargo Planning and Development.
Melissa Rademacher, Downtown Community Partnership.
Shara Fisher, Fargo Planning Commission. Linda Glebe, Member at Large.
And I'm John Strand.
Matthew Pike, Executive Director of the Fargo Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
Sam McDonald, Member at Large.
Thomas Hill from United Way.
Nicole Crutchfield, City of Fargo Planning.
Tia Brasa, City of Fargo Planning.
Miranda Wolf, City of Fargo Planning.
Okay, let's run through the audience, if you don't mind just saying who you are. Okay. Okay, hi Laura. Okay, and then we have Jim Johnson from the school board showing up. Welcome, Jim. I know this Tuesday of this day of the week isn't your best day.
There's a lot of gravel trucks coming downtown.
We really do appreciate your attendance. Okay, so has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes, or are there any corrections or changes? If not, we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Moved, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jim. Any further discussion on minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, they will be posted as they are written. We'll go on to our first applicant for the Muller Barber College storefront rehab. I'm having trouble talking. Who will be leading us through this?
Kylie Bagley will be leading us through this.
Thanks, Kylie.
So in front of you is an application for a storefront rehab project. The applicant is Joel Jagger. The subject property is located at 16th 8th Street South, and it is the old Muller Barber College. This application is for the storefront part of the building. Just for right now, I believe possibly maybe later he'll come back for the apartments, but just for now we're looking at the storefront. The building was originally constructed in 1912, and he does have some historic images in the packet as well that were from 1954 was, I believe, the earliest that he could find. This application did go in front of the Historic Preservation Commission this morning. Their recommendation for the project was actually to deny it and have the applicant come back with additional renderings on the property. They just had some suggestions that they thought could help make the storefront look a little bit more historic. They will hold a special meeting for this. They didn't want to hold up the property, but they felt that it was important that additional renderings were provided to their commission. So they will have a special meeting before their next monthly meeting here. And Joel Jagger's here also to give you a little bit more update on his application.
Joel, you're welcome to come up to the podium. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, for having me. As was stated, this is an oldie but a goodie, as they say. This is a property that was built early 1900s, 1912. It was originally constructed for the Northwestern Telephone Exchange Company, and thereafter was part of the relatively vibrant printing industry here in Fargo, and since the mid-60s has been home to the Muller Barber College. As you can see, looking at me, the whole barber thing is not terribly important for me personally, but for the rest of the gentlemen in the room, there's relatively good odds that any barber in Fargo that may have touched your hair probably came through that place over time. It's Been a lot of haircuts that tie back to that location. As was mentioned, and thank you for pointing it out, we did meet with the Historical Preservation Committee this morning. They seemed very supportive of the program, which I appreciated, and gave some good input on some things that we could consider, a couple angles on the property, and so just wanted us to get them a couple additional drawings, and it sounded like we should be able to get it approved through a email and process and not have to go through the meeting process next month, but also understand that you folks need to look at it. And so you can kind of see the pictures that we've drawn there, but I guess more than anything, I just entertain questions that you have. I should give this little piece of background, I guess. We own the property immediately to the south of this one, which is 18 8th Street. My wife and I, in combination with a couple of partners and a family business that we have on that property, own a handful of properties on this street, and that one to the south, we've actually redone the storefront on. We did not request grant money on that one, but it was in pretty dilapidated condition when we purchased it about 5 years ago, and so we redid the storefront on that and have also remodeled the apartments upstairs. This particular building, 16 8th Street, even though the grant, as you mentioned, does not have anything to do with the apartments upstairs, we have remodeled those apartments upstairs. They were similarly downtrodden when we bought it. There was a great deal of drug activity, unfortunately, in that building, as well as other properties that we've got in the area when we picked it up. And so we're trying to do our level best to improve the aesthetic of the properties. That would be what's related to this particular grant request, but also to make it a thriving part of the downtown community. It's a neat corridor down there coming up from the south from the historic Hawthorne neighborhood, which is a great neighborhood and an entry point into downtown. And so there's been so much vibrancy and so much investment in downtown. We think it's important, particularly as you view that as an entry point into downtown, that we clean it up, and so we're trying to do our part in that regard. So that's a little background, and I can certainly give you more on us. A few of you I've met before on this process. We did the Mr. Money building, and so came before this committee. The ugly big blue, I think, as it got referred to a few years ago. And so we got that ugly duckling taken care of and properly raised, we hope, and now we want to do this one.
Okay, anybody have any questions at all for Joel or for Kylie?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to say thank you to you and your wife for everything that you do and your passion for being downtown, and what you've done in that area is phenomenal. You and Chris, thank you.
I appreciate it very much, and yeah, the credit really should go to Christine, my wife. Anything that is aesthetically pleasing would be her. I can swing a hammer if I need to, but the part that looks good would be on her. So thanks for that comment, and I'll pass it on.
Joel, if I might ask, with the Preservation Commission, is it just a technical waiting for drawings and renderings, or Kylie, is that what they're waiting for? And then do they anticipate an approval, or do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, from this morning's meeting, excuse me, they're just waiting on additional renderings from Joel, and they sounded really supportive of the project, so I don't see them denying this once they get the additional renderings.
Thomas?
If I could, Joel, are you prepared to have those renderings that you think would meet their needs, or is that something that's doable from your perspective, or is it like, pardon me, is that yeah?
Yeah, it's no problem. I could actually point out what I think the major change would be relative to the graphic that you can see. I'm trying to see if it's, do they have this? The picture here is essentially what I believe needs to be redrawn, but maybe if you're not into blueprints, the easier way to look at it would be on the photo from the 1954 timeframe. You see that how the doorway that will now go up to the apartments is going to be moved to the left-hand side of the photo, and then there's the main entrance into the retail space right in the center of the picture. The primary thing, and I really appreciated the input on it, you can see from the picture that as you go in toward what is that main entrance door, it's on an angle. And the drawing that's on the subsequent page, it was a square corner. And that's a simple fix to make. I actually, since that meeting happened this morning, have already talked with the contractor that we would be working with, and so that's going to be a simple change to make. And so I would expect, actually, we'd have that done in the next couple of days, certainly this week, and get that back to the committee for their review. So yes, to answer your question, we can pull that off, no trouble.
And if I may, just one further, is that the dollars that you're requesting, is that like a linchpin to this being done? I mean, or can you not start until you know an answer, or does the delay of any sort of action from this committee delay your plans to do this?
Yeah, to be very candid, I probably wouldn't do the project without this grant. We're doing the best we can down there, but the rents on the south side of Main Avenue, frankly, are not what the rents are down the street on Broadway. And I've got a tenant, I like the business, frankly, the barber school business. They've been here a long time. They're, I think, an important part of the community, and I would expect that they would be there for some point in time. But I inherited their lease, and so they've got another 5 or 6 years on that lease, and so we would be doing this project. A lot of times, in fact, the one I did on Broadway, that we did on Broadway, we did as part of the condition to get a new tenant in there, and we were able to charge more lease rate because we were able to do that. On this one, it's purely us trying to put lipstick on to not put lipstick on a pig, to actually make the pig look better, if you'll pardon the term. And so we'd be doing this without any expectation of any rent that would come along to help offset that cost. And so from a business perspective, to answer your question, we would likely not do the project if the grant dollars weren't here, which is a credit, frankly, to the program.
Okay, anybody else?
I just have, if I could, Mr. Chair, thanks for the application, of course, and at this point, it seems to me that the money you're asking for is not directly tied, to the issuance of a building permit. This is just about financing through CDBG that you need to try and make this work, but the building permit is going to be issued or not issued based upon the approval from historic preservation, right?
Yeah, that would be my expectation. I wouldn't see a problem with the building permit itself.
Okay, but you can't get one until you've got approval from preservation, right?
Well, no, we could go get a building permit and actually not do the project in line with the requirements of the Historic Commission. We'd obviously have to be sensitive to certain things downtown and rules for signage and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I just had not contemplated, hadn't planned to go pull the building permit until we were prepared to do the project, which will actually probably happen in January or February. We're trying to be sensitive to the tenant. We could do it in December because they've got a window there where they would not be there. But in terms of pulling the building permit, if we were to be doing it to the rules of the historic preservation elements, then yeah, we'd obviously need them to go along with that.
Okay.
Is that responsive?
It is. In fact, it leads me inevitably to my next question, which is only this. So I guess my question's more for the city folks. Like, I don't want to get distracted as a member of this committee from things that I'm picking up within this application that seem to be within the purview of historic preservation. Like specifically, it says, to receive historic preservation approval, projects cannot submit plans that include the use of anodized aluminum, and yet at the same time, if I look at the materials that are being proposed under features, Trifab 451 UT framing system, right from the bottom of the features is permadic anodized finishes in 7 choices. So I don't want to get distracted by any of that stuff, do I? I just want to focus on whether or not this project, meets with this committee's approval and whether or not it has my support with regard to funding, correct?
Sure.
Is that correct for the city? Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure I'm not putting on my historic preservation hat.
It's a good hat to wear, though.
Well, I wore it for 6 years. I don't want to wear it anymore. Thank you.
Tim, did you have something? Okay, anybody else? What are the wishes of the committee in this situation? Do you want to wait until it's come back to us after historic preservation? Or do you want a contingency motion based on their approval? Jim?
That was my question. Could we approve it subject to the historic preservation
I
approval?
I would think you can if that's the desire of the commission.
That's what I'll move.
We have a motion to approve this contingent upon acceptance of the proposal project by the Historic Preservation Commission, moved by Jim Johnson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Thomas. Further discussion?
And just to be clear, the amount we're approving is $14,923.50, subject to the vote?
Subject to the Historic Preservation Commission. Yes.
Thanks.
Any other questions or concerns? Any other comments? Anybody else? If not, could we have Miranda roll call vote, please?
Fisher,
Aye.
Klebe,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Pike,
Aye.
Rademacher,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Strand.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much.
I have a follow-on question.
Certainly.
What's our balance in that department for
What?
the year?
Nicole, or who might know that?
We're still operating in 2018 funding? Yes. Yeah, answer that question.
Yes.
We know what the balance
I don't know the balance offhand, but I know that there is enough to
There's
cover
sufficient
this
left.
storefront, yeah, and a few others.
That might be something we just kind of tag along whenever we have requests. We know what our existing pool of resources to work with is, and so we might just routinely kind of anticipate that question. Anybody else? Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, folks,
Is that-
very much.
Is that your building or the one next to it that has that big old jade plant? Oh, there's a jade plant that's like one of the biggest I've ever seen in town. Anyway, thanks very much. Pardon me? Oh, I don't think so. It's been there longer than most of us.
There's a number
Plant.
of things I do on the block that aren't necessarily, it's just nobody else wants to scratch that.
All
Need something to move, Tom.
all right. Okay, we'll go on to item number 4, neighborhood concerns. Nicole, who will be addressing these topics?
Tyrone was scheduled, but he is out sick today, and our building official was not available to be here today either. But maybe what I can do is give you a 2019 budget update. I'm not sure if that was the goal of this agenda item, plus I think you might have wanted to do an update on the noise ordinance. I think we were
We do.
looking for Michael Bredlinger, which I don't have an update on.
Okay, and I see Arlette's in the audience too, and I'm guessing that's part of her interest here maybe as well. Well, so you were saying you would do a budget item?
Well, I don't know if everybody knows that the 2019 budget included a code enforcement full-time staff person in our budget, or in our inspections office. And so as a direct conversation that the Neighborhood Coalition's been having with our city commissioners, for several years, I think we finally got that full-time code enforcer to kind of focus on properties. I think Commissioner Strand had asked us to talk a little bit about, our board members might not understand or know that we have a code enforcement task force. And basically, the purpose of that task force is to look at overlaying codes. So many of our ordinances kind of layer with different authorities. And so the task force includes inspections, planning, health, fire, police. So we work with, kind of a broad category of topics, and often they don't have a home base. And so this code enforcement task force meets to collaborate. So if we get a complaint or a citation, we'll pursue that, and then typically one department will take the lead, and then we coordinate with our city attorney's office to be more proactive in terms of that municipal court or citation discussion. But often, that's a lot of how we've been kind of targeting the dangerous buildings that I've been getting in front of the city commission in the past few months, is through a collaborated effort with public health and other issues. So I think if I remember correctly, Commissioner Strandy wanted us to just kind of make sure everybody understood we had this code enforcement task force and understand they meet quarterly. If we used to meet monthly, but we didn't really have that many cases or updates, that once they get to a citation kind of attorney kind of level of prosecution, it gets a little slow. And so, so usually a quarterly update is about all we need, and then we keep each other abreast of that. And so this position, all the departments are pretty excited about this new 2019 position, because then that will allow that focus to kind of a case navigator to go from department to department and kind of be that coordinator, if you will. And so we hope for even more proactive code enforcement in 2019 as we get that person on board.
Nicole, would you explain to us why all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but why we kind of went into a limbo phase or a phase of inactivity, and then now we're back at it? There were some legal issues and other evolutions over time that...
A couple of different things, and maybe, I don't want to put Mark Williams on the spot from the old days, but previously, I mean, truth be told, a lot of it is political will. And then a lot of it is municipal court. And so between all those ducks being in a row, having the direction to move forward. So we've always been a complaint-driven code element. We don't have full-time staff to just ride around and look for things. And most of our code enforcers drive around and look for things while they're doing something else. And so as they bring those cases forward, they may or may not have, kind of teeth. You need a lot of evidence to go to court, and so it takes a concentrated effort with that. We used to kind of do citations with police tickets and kind of component. I'm not going to get this quite right without our attorneys here, but that was we basically lost a court case to say that was unconstitutional, and so we took that measure away. That was, we used to have a kind of more of a broader task force in that regards. That was probably 15, 20 years ago when we had that, and now it's, so that kind of went away. I think a lot of the system lost its support or a lot, ambition, if you will, when we lost that court case. But we're now been strategizing how we can kind of do different techniques. And I think Grand Forks ended up taking that kind of citation ordinance code forward to legislation and got approved. And so we've actually been having a lot of internal conversation about how to do it more like a ticket as opposed to court. So for instance, if you're speeding and get a citation, 35-mile-an-hour speed limit ticket type of thing, there's a pathway versus going to municipal court through, and then also looking at that criminal action versus civil action and all of those kinds of things. So that's where, if you wanted a full-on detailed report on the process, I would bring in Alyssa, who's our assistant city attorney in Eric's office, to walk through. So we kind of just bring her the stuff, and then she takes it from there.
So Nicole, this is all properties. It's not just apartments. It's not just homes.
It's everything.
It's everything out
Yeah.
there.
You can imagine the number of codes that kind of layer on. So if someone, say, maybe has a lot of junk on their property and also is doing car repairs and has also got a lot of abandoned vehicles and maybe tall grass, and might have, some other issues. A lot of times, if there's one, there's many, and so we, without a coordinator, we could be, because each of those ordinance has a different authority base. It could be the police chief, it could be the environmental health, it could be the city engineer, it could be the mayor. All of these have different authorities, and so then there's a layering of investigation that has to happen in coordination, and that's where Eric's office really helps us out.
And Nicole, do you think this sense of us being in litigation right now with the one incidence of a condemned house, will that have any impact at all?
I don't think so.
Anticipate on our processes going forward?
No, I don't believe it should.
Okay. Any questions at all on this? The neighborhood associations have been very vocal to us in the last few years about neighborhoods and about the status of neighborhoods and the changing in their neighborhoods. And it's not just houses, but they're especially concerned as well about, like, Roosevelt neighborhood for all the apartments and the condition of the houses. So this stepping up of the inspections and the code enforcement is is something that they're receiving very well, yet they're still continuing to challenge us to pay very close attention to what's happening in their neighborhoods. So even things like rental registries are topics that they're batting around out there, bantering around about with regard to apartments. And we will hear more from the neighborhood's leadership as this goes on. Who, Nicole, are our point people for inspections and code enforcement?
Bruce Tarleson,
Bruce
our
Tarleson.
building official.
Okay. Okay, anybody else? Anybody have any feedback?
I guess I'd say only this one, thank you, Nicole. And to Mr. Chair, I mean, I agree with you, and I think I'll leave it to the consensus of the membership that if we can keep this on the agenda in some form or another in terms of just for an update, because I know the issue that Arlette brought up at the last meeting is something that I wouldn't want to lose sight of, because it mixes, you know, this, it's a really interesting sort of model for the process to see how we can reconcile these issues from this committee's point of view, and if we have a role to play both in balancing citizens and residents' concerns in addition to commercial requests when it comes to the permitting process, and then when there is noise violations past a certain hour. I mean, do we have a role to play? And I think this is a great model to sort of follow up on. But two is I think it's an important issue overall for the community development committee to sort of keep an eye on, and I just wouldn't want to let it drop off the agenda if that's okay with you, sir.
So Matt, are you suggesting, and I like what I'm hearing, that we might just ongoingly have some updates
That would be great.
from status, activities, and actions?
Yeah, and if I were to recommend maybe a couple things to correct my answer I just gave you in terms of, it's Bruce Tarleson for some things, it's the environmental health for some things, it's the planning department for some things. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all, and which is the problem, that we're a decentralized city organization, not a centralized organization. And so we all report to the mayor and, or I should say the city administrator. And so that's where I get a little concerned on the Community Development Committee. We're not necessarily a holder for all other departments and ordinances in terms of a vehicle for, and Melissa could attest to this as part of the Downtown Community Partnership and the Business Improvement District. She's got a long list of directory of staff members that she consults based on certain topics, and that's our communication to the Neighborhood Coalition and the neighborhood associations, as well as here's our list of contacts based on trash, noise, crime, all that, and there's a long list of, and we're not really a one centralized organization, unfortunately. And so that is my only concern on where this goes. I think our Let's comment last month on where she takes a noise ordinance concern to, the police department is the authority of the noise ordinance. If we want to do a noise ordinance draft, again, that comes to the police department, to the city commission, and then back down to us as we find out our various staff members. And so the permit we were looking at last month was actually allowed by right. It wasn't necessarily a component that we could regulate against. And so, so we need to be careful where those authorities lie, and I want to be mindful of your time as well. So.
Thanks. No, and I think infrequent, but, you know, quarterly or something,
Yeah.
updates would be fantastic. And I only mean
Yeah.
to say, like, it's just really interesting information to see if there's a role, assuming no authority whatsoever. But I think when Arlette brought up one sort of example that we could kind of examine over time, it became really interesting to say, like, it might be informative just to see, as we have a growing sort of interest in some of these areas, is there any role for us to play? The answer may be, over time, no.
Yeah.
But infrequent updates would be awesome.
And people don't always know where to go.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, and I think
for
that's the thing.
topics. And-
If they had come to us as part of that question, we would have gotten them to the right place.
And when we do receive these ideas, we can help direct folks. And for example, we had the discussion surface in Arlette. I'm sorry we don't have answers for you today on noise enforcement downtown. But I've also heard from another person in the city about that in a different light. Then we have another example out there, which I think has gone to the DCP with regard to garbage pickup and scheduling of when the trucks go down these neighborhoods. Downtown didn't always have so much what we want to be as a neighborhood. And when you have garbage trucks going through at 5:30, 6 in the morning out your back window, you know, so these are the types of topics, if nothing else, we can try to be a clearinghouse with regard to the context of our mission as community development in neighborhoods. But it doesn't mean we always have the authority, but we can certainly help corral our services or other voices of the city and see where things are for people who have these concerns. Was there any update otherwise on the noise issue? I don't know there was.
No, I believe you were working with.
Mike Redlinger,
Mike,
and
yeah.
there's nothing formal to report. Okay, anything else on code enforcement or task forces for inspections and code enforcement? Okay. We'll go on to the working group for community developments. And am I putting ourselves, maybe we start, Nicole or whomever, with remind us of the scheduling and the timing of these grants, where we are in this process, and how soon things will come, then we'll get to the task force or the committee.
Sure. So maybe just as an update on item number 5, social service funds, and I'll pass it over for Tia for any questions, but there's a laydown item in front of you today that is a memo from Tia regarding our application for social service fund. And so this is the cover memo explaining that we're separating the community development block grant application from the social service fund application. We have a projected timeline, if that's okay with you. We were just talking before this meeting that we might push it back even more a little bit to allow a little bit more time from the distribution date to the application date to make sure people have enough time. We would imagine meeting sometime around Thanksgiving, towards the end of the month, for that vetting, if you will, and then trying to bring a recommendation to you in the December meeting. And so our goal would be to try to get to the last January meeting in City Commission in order to get checks cut for Giving Hearts Day. So that's a little bit of timeline we're working with. You can see in our cover memo that we try to segregate communication between, for our applicants on if they're trying to decide whether social service funds or CDBG money is appropriate for them. And so we kind of give them some kind of tips, if you will. Some people or organizations might find that they have ideas relevant for both sources of money. The next part, and then in terms of the application itself, we're asking people to go ahead and narrow down their type of request. Are they, these affordable housing and homelessness, poverty reduction neighborhoods, these are all programs that community development has passed as their goals for the work that you all do. And so we ask that the applicant check one of those boxes or all of the above if they feel like it does. And then identify if it's a capital expense or a program expense. And then the rest should look very similar to what you've seen in the past. And we just try to take out any duplications related to CDBG. And then we ask a little bit more pointed question on how they're leveraging other monies so that we can understand who their partners are. So those are the main changes that we've added to this year's application. I don't know, Tia, if you have anything else to add?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up, and if applicants are confused because they're not used to seeing this, I've given them my direct line so they can call me and we can visit about it, and I can help them determine which might be a better source for them, and they may apply to both. So far, that's what we've discussed. Certainly, that's open for discussion with this committee, whether or not we want to limit it to just applying to one or both funds.
And I think Linda Boyd had asked you, and it is available online as well. It's not all just via written communications.
Yes, it will be. It's not online yet, but as soon as this memo goes out to the list of all of the organizations that receive it annually, we'll make sure the link is uploaded and mentioned in this memo.
Okay. Last year, any questions so far? Last year, we kind of embarked on a little different approach to this, where we had a working group in our own, from our own membership that vetted the applications and rated them relative and scored them relative to our mission and to our goals as a community development committee. I know we had Thomas on it last year, we had Sam, and we had Linda. And were there any others of you that were on that last year? And I guess the question is are you three, and then we'll see who else is, are you willing to go at it again?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the process? Let's get some feedback before we go a little further about where we did it and what you remember and what we might change or not going, because it's still an evolving approach.
I think the process worked well. I like the fact that the city's taking a more closely defined look at what investments they're making as related to its mission. I mean, and I think trying to be a catch-all and investing, small amounts of dollars into a large number of things, I think it's a feel-good thing, but I don't think that honestly does a lot for the residents of the city. That's just my personal take, and I think from what my professional experience would tell me. So I would hope that this committee would be open to still seeing how do we closely align with what the city of Fargo's goals are, and making sure that investments are aligned to that. Absolutely welcome anybody that has other thoughts or wishes to be on this review committee, but I think having different points of view represented without having the whole committee having to sit down and read through all, 30, 40 applications that come in, I don't know if that's a good use of everybody's time. So, you're more than welcome to do it, but, so yeah, I guess I would be more than willing to help again, and if there's any changes that need to be made, or if any folks from the city have any specific thoughts about changing process, I'd be open to it.
Okay, Sam?
Yes, I think we've made some really good progress in the last couple of years. Moving forward, just as a side comment, maybe this is for later discussion, I think that we have the opportunity to take a more proactive role in seeing what is out there that might not be aware of this opportunity or understand their fit, and putting some pieces together as opposed to just reactive granting to what comes through the door. Because, I mean, we publish it, we open up meetings, we are very clear communicating this, but I think we're still missing a lot of opportunities that might be out there that just don't know that we could be a part of that, whether it's through the grant money, and we've talked about also how can we help as a committee move projects forward, work, remove those barriers as a committee.
Nicole and Dorothea, do you have a sense of how do we outreach now? And relative to Sam's question, are there ways to get to new people?
It's a great question. Right now, we have a roster that we keep, and every time someone comes in asking for money, which is probably weekly, we show them to this, saying in the fall, we're gonna have this program, and we'll add you to the list for distribution. So that's kind of probably the most direct way you have that connection, and then we keep this roster that we distribute out as soon as the applications go live. Sure. And then we do a press release and things like that.
Great.
And I think your point is well taken. Even if each of us individually knows of entities out there that are, especially new folks to town, new Americans and refugee groups don't always easily know what's available, or anybody else, what's available in town for them to go reach to. And then there's some parameters like whether they're religiously based or not. But so at a minimum, okay.
Yeah, or even if there's goals that we have as a committee, as the city, that aren't being met, that we would like to see some fill in, soliciting that, making sure that we've got, these things covered and the goals that we want met.
You're hitting such a good topic there, and this is a time for us to think about all of this. Then we'll come to you next, Linda. But in the past, we've tended to, and Tom alluded to this, we've tended to just kind of repeat what we've always done and try and make everybody a little bit happy. And you end up with $1,000 grants or small little, maybe they really might not be as impactful as we desire them to be. But so there was a beginnings last year of our committee, our working committee, to start to refocus and start focus on bigger targets, bigger, more leverageable impacts that we can have. And we started with that. We got some feedback, some pushback from folks that weren't accustomed to that in the past. But I'm comfortable. I think we were all pretty confident that where we were going was to try consolidate and leverage our impacts more. But this is the time when we're going into this that folks joining up with the working group, put their input into it. Let us know if you're okay with that sense of consolidating, making them more as we do them, and getting more result with the ones we do. If that makes sense. Linda, why don't you join in for a moment?
Well, my first thought is, we were given this social services many, many years ago. It used to be the mayor's discretionary fund. And I don't think our budget has changed since we got it from the very beginning. So that's a concern because, as you pointed out, some of these small programs that we cut to give money to something else, they weren't anticipating a cut because they had been getting it, fairly consistently. And on their development side, they may have had a very big problem replacing those dollars for significant programs. And then we've had requests now coming in for new programs with no infusion of new money. So we haven't been a squeaky wheel in the mayor's ear because all of these requests used to come to his office, their office at the time, and that's how we got it. So that, I guess, would be a first question is, when do we get a budget increase?
We ask every year, and it's denied every year.
Okay, well then,
There's a little change, though, this year.
Slightly, but I wouldn't say it's not very transparent.
No, we, for example, used to, up until this year, fund the Native American Commission activities entirely, almost through community development. And that's 40 or so thousand, and that discussion evolved a year ago, but it just didn't quite fit. So we've successfully moved that into the city's general fund budget activities, because it's a city entity. And we have a little bit of breathing room there. Arts and culture will be another topic next, where there's some of our budget, I think, for arts and culture. No, there isn't. It's
no,
just Native
that
American.
got taken away.
That's already addressed.
We already gave that.
So we have that, but I think you're raising a good point, too. Like, for example, we have the mayor, no secret, advocating for us to consider as a community development organization a microloan program. Okay, well, how are we going to fund it?
Right.
Then we need to go to the mayor's office and say, where can you come up with assistance for this? There's some other projects we're working on related to workforce development, but those are legitimate questions of where's this funding coming from to take on these new initiatives.
And should we be reaching out to other entities that would potentially fund these programs that we haven't done because it never was brought up?
Yeah, so Linda, in terms of your question, it is still considered the mayor's discretionary budget. It just gets allocated to us. So these are some of the things that aren't very clean. One of the things we talked about at our last meeting is that we don't have any authority. This committee has no authority, no ordinance, or no bylaws. And so as we look at kind of good government business practice, we have some cleaning up to do over in 2019. And, but yeah, this mayor's social service funds works very much just mayor's discretionary budget. And so every year, it used to be a percentage of the, you might remember it was a percentage of the mill. And then that got established maybe about 10 years ago, set to 250. And we asked every year it's threatened to be cut and in its entirety. And so I think we, Commissioner Strand and our liaison commissioners at the time and the mayor and the staff do a good job of advocating for keeping it. And we're thankful for even just keeping the 250 in terms of the status of what I see inside the city hall. Mm-hmm. And so this is how I get the people to my office weekly, is they come to the mayor's office and then they come to me. And then we learn more about their programs and their needs.
Sometimes it's nice to have things come to us from the community as identified needs, and then we can do our work on those topics, and then we have a position from which to advocate, and this is where I open our minds up, or suggest we keep our minds open. What is community development? When we say neighborhoods, what do we mean by neighborhood, and so on? What do we mean by poverty? What are our definitions of homelessness? What's our roles in these things? But if it's our job will be to help meet community needs and help bring the other resources to the table to help come together to do that. So we have Thomas, we have Sam, and we have Linda. Who else, if anybody would like to? There's room for, this is a good hands-on exposure to the committees. If you to the work we do. This 253,000, I want to say, last year that was allocated, or
yeah, and it got cut actually. So 250.
250,000.
Yeah.
This is a real direct impact. Is there anybody else in the room that would like to, for the next few months, be part of this? Jim?
Might as well go learn.
Jim, I was hoping you'd say yes. Anybody else? Okay? Melissa and Jim. So we don't want to have a quorum, so what I'll kind of be is, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That'll be our committee. Okay? Any other feedback or comments on that? Nicole, you're comfortable where we're going?
Absolutely.
Makes
And then
sense.
we'll send out, we'll probably right after this meeting, go ahead and send some calendar reservation time so we can get schedules coordinated as we go into November and December.
And last year, one of the other topics we did in the very end is we had a little bit of a cushion so that there was room for anything that would emerge that wasn't addressed, that got our attention. You might recall we pulled out some resources for the Global Youth United soccer program because it just wasn't going to get going traction-wise, and now hopefully the Park District has picked that up. But that's an example of 85 kids from other parts of the world that needed something to do in summer. And I'll qualify, Jim, you're on the school board. A year ago, if it wasn't for Todd Olson and allowing this group of kids to have access to the Carl Ben Allison fields for soccer and their soccer nets, they wouldn't have had a program. So the school district really played a huge role in this. A year ago, this year, we've rolled the Park District, to my knowledge, successfully. But that's just an example of an emerging need that our committee decided to address. Okay,
I have a
anything?
follow-on question.
Certainly.
Do you by any chance keep a list of the types of requests you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the people that come in, you know, a lot of it's economic I would put up to economic development, a lot of starting companies who are looking for just loans. I'd say loans is probably the #1 request. Especially for new residents who are, you know, kind of setting up shop for the first time.
And is there any avenue that we haven't addressed in attempting to get that kind of funding with this committee? I mean, that would be within our purview of community development /
Well, I think the microloan component is trying to crack that nut.
and there's no federal funds that we could look for in that regard.
Possibly with CDBG. I think as we look into our, one of the things I mentioned last month, as we look into closing down this past 5 years of CDBG, so we've got 1 more year under CDBG, and then we go into our next 5-year planning effort. And so in our next 5-year planning effort, I think we can, you know, look to how we, you know, break down those components further. It's a national discussion, and so we're looking for ways of being innovative with CDBG.
But we don't have an authority within this committee to go out and actually be a development organization to get funds for this.
No, I think that's a discussion for 2019 as well, as we, I'm guessing every member here has a different definition of community development and roles and authority. I understand this committee to be kind of focused on, you know, historically maybe meeting 4 or 5 times a year with action related to community development block grant dollars. And so this is kind of new for us too, as we try to define how to have this integration and collaboration across all of the city business and community development business. And so I think it's a topic to explore and figure out how staff can support you. And I think that's my, you know, if you hear any resistance from me, it's mostly because how can we meet your expectations? And right now we're, I would say, woefully inadequate in our resources. As I mentioned last time, our actually number 8, when you're ready to talk about that, is very much tied to some findings on CDBG and HUD. So
This is a good conversation to have, and, you know, the mayor and others know that, you know, that I tend to be a squeaky wheel. But there's the reality also of what can our staff really deliver effectively. And so it's always this balance, and things don't always move as fast as you'd like them to move. But in my mind, as long as I'm chair, it's our job, I think, to act accordingly to what community development needs are. And yet we're defining our role real differently. I just came back from a conference in Baltimore, and almost everybody there was community development or housing authority folks. You know, so I was kind of like a fish out of water, learning and listening to them. But but there's just an endless amount of things we can do. And we're a growing city, you know, so with these changes, it's up to us if we decide to evolve our roles and then make sure that the staff is there and fight for the adequate staff so that as community needs are coming up, they have the support to deliver. So it's a good conversation to have. Okay, anything else on the topic of the commission, the committee? We have Thomas, we have Linda, we have Sam, we have Melissa and Jim. Thomas, Linda, Sam, Melissa, and Jim are the task force that will be working on the grants. And nobody's really chair necessarily. Do we need a chair?
That would be great if you had a chair.
Is there anybody in this group that would like to be chair?
Linda would like to be. I'm sure of it.
Linda, you want to be chair?
I can take that on.
Linda,
I'm
you
the
also-
only one. I'm looking
well-
at Sam.
Well, the thing you have here, after Linda Boyd's gone, is you have all these years' experience. You've been on this commission since it was created, I believe. So there's nice, good suggestion, Jim. All right, going on to the next topic. This is another one of those topics. I know we had a couple meetings ago, a report on sheltering preparations and homeless needs in community, but it's right around the corner, this weather. And a year ago, I don't believe we as a community were quite prepared for what hit when January came around. And it's a broader than Fargo issue. But so I've asked Nicole to kind of give us an update on our proactive approach this year to the homeless topic and the sheltering topics relative to us, so we can kind of see what's coming and hopefully not be as surprised when the weather hits full bore.
Yeah, so this year, I think Mark Williams and Tia and myself are reaching out to our public health department and emergency responders and our city administrators to kind of figure out who's leading what. I think our report last time from the Churches United was they're also organizing amongst the shelters, and the shelters are planning on, kind of sheltering in place. However, we, I wouldn't say question that, but we recognize that as places get full, we should have a game plan. I think last year, what got a little confusing is we had the state of Minnesota declaring an emergency, and so the city of Fargo put on our emergency responders hat. When we go in, like, for instance, in a flood mode, I become an emergency operator. And so we had that hat on. And so we were responding as part of that emergency declaration. But otherwise, we didn't really have any authority or ability or funds or tools. And so we just started discussing things with Mike Redlinger, our assistant city administrator, to figure out what the city's response is going to be as part of this. And so I guess that's about the only update I have. I don't know, Mark, if you have anything else. So we're just starting some coordination. But I think the point I was trying to make to Commissioner Strand and Michael is my department, we don't have money, people trained in medical response, people trained in psychiatric response or providing services. We are policy people, we're not operators. And so the operators at the table to line out that the steps needed, we fully trust that they've got it. And so it's just trying to find that avenue of response and getting that coordinated and communicated with the city commission. So I believe, I don't want to put words in Michael's mouth, but I believe Michael's working on some sort of coordination to the city commission.
Yes, and we've had a discussion at the mayor's office with the city administrators about trying to outreaching more to Jan Eliason and Gladys Ray Shelter and some of the folks that's their world they live in, so that they're helping us proactively right up front shape what our response might be going into this year. And it's really more their turf, but it's in our mission. So this is kind of a balancing game of reality and our mission and our capabilities, but we also have winter coming. And so it's I think my desire is our community's fully prepared for when the weather hits, and hopefully we don't need it. these emergency shelters, but I hope we're more prepared this year than the year ago. We'd had 5 years of churches providing shelters, and then that program diminished, and they've it ended essentially. So there's this gap in service provision locally. So
I'd
thank
say-
you for the lead.
Yeah, and I would say we can, as we learn more through our meetings, we'll be able to report more in terms of what we know, and you probably all know this as well in terms of the work you do, but I'd say our situation, our capacity in our shelters and housing, we've got 2 or 3 new projects open and constructed since last December, and so I think that's the other thing, is that we have more beds out there, and I think last year, the average count we heard was about 30 extra beds that we needed in the cold, super cold months, and that 30 is all got, there's 30 beds ready and able in our community. And so, again, the shelters really do, last I heard from them, really do plan to just shelter in place, if you will, and also know that their operations are, including police and fires and emergency responders, everybody's trained to be out in the field and combing the sidewalks and checking in with people out on the street when it becomes dangerous weather, so.
Just coming back from Baltimore and hearing about what other cities face, there's one, I think it was Philadelphia, has encampments of homeless people that are just ridden with heroin abuse issues. And the circumstances that we deal with are so different than what other communities deal with, but we still have our own needs, and it's our job to take care of what our folks' needs are locally. But we can knock on wood, sometimes it's not as bad as it is in so many parts of the world. Okay, anything else?
Question on that.
Certainly.
So I misunderstood, because I thought Churches United said that they had taken that emergency shelter away from the traveling churches program to them doing it. And so they were providing that extra 30 beds in their facilities?
I think they're the coordinator as well as the facility, but they also coordinate amongst the other shelters.
Okay.
And so New Life and some other, I think, some other
Providers.
facilities have now opened that have more beds.
Rather than putting them in the churches, they're doing them at the regular shelters now.
Correct.
And so with this question on this preparations, is it that we simply need to verify that that's up and running, that they're, or do we need an additional facility?
Well, you might recall last year, the governor of Minnesota declared a state emergency
Right.
and opened up the Moorhead Armory. And after the armory was open, I'm not sure how many days that was,
I think it was 14 days.
a couple weeks then, okay, I was good. And then Dilworth offered space,
The community center.
okay? That's my concern is Fargo needs to be proactive about Fargo right up front and transporting or getting people to and from Dilworth, or, I'm just hoping that, and I know this is stretching our staffs, that it's a different role to assume, but it is in our mission, the homeless issue. It's in our defined job description. So if we can try to help coordinate and try to understand and be proactive about the needs and all that, and it's not saying that this is on your shoulders, it's just like, how do we all get there better? But that's my concern, is last year there was a need for space, and in the end they were going to Dilworth. It's no secret, I'll say this anytime, I was ready to get my key and open up the lobby to Civic Center, if there's people out there. And I will, frankly, and I hope we never get to that point. But if Fargo's got to be prepared, just like if we have a warning of a hurricane coming at us, and we have winter coming at us.
And I guess I will say, not to belabor it, but speaking of hurricane, so emergency services, so public health leads our emergency service team. So we're recruiting them as part of leading this discussion because they have access to the resources for emergency management.
And that's a great clarification proactively going into this as to where does the authority and expertise actually lie. And I think you're correct there. That's where the bulk of it is in public health arena, or fire departments, law enforcement, emergency responders, police, and so on. Okay. This is more just keeping it on our radar, but it's already mid-October. Staff updates on the Cowboy Jack's application, which had...
Yeah, mainly that's just to let you know it was withdrawn. I know you all tabled it last month, but it was withdrawn altogether, so you won't be seeing that again in the near future.
So what's withdrawn is the request for the storefront grant,
Correct.
correct? Now, while we're at it, if we have just a second, Jim Johnson, as a new member, was asking, like, when you do storefronts, and what if there's a building that has like 3 fronts or 2 fronts? Or is it limited to one side, or is it per side? Or I was curious about this question too.
In the past, I think the only one that we had that was a multiple side was the cidery, and we gave them slightly more in their budget rather than, and when we first originally started this, somebody came with a big request, and then we determined that we had to moderate how much we give out so that we could do as much work as we could. And so I think that was the only one that we gave an enhanced award to. And I think it went from 15 to 20,000. Because this is an incentive rather than,
An entitlement for...
yeah. We've only got 100,000, I think, in this whole slice. So, whether we use that, we've talked about, are we done with storefronts? Have we finished everybody yet? And we're almost close. We're almost there to have been, we've almost done every single one of the storefronts downtown. So then do we change the focus of this particular fund to do more housing rehab or something else?
And that question has surfaced quite a few times in different ways.
We're starting to get there.
But Nicola, help me recall, isn't it based on a blight study?
Yes, so we need to do a slum and blight update. Again, as we go into our next, we're just trying to close this year out and close 2019, and then as we go into 2020 and get our new 5-year plan. So we have to adopt a 5-year plan, a 1-year plan, and then do the activities. And so we're just trying to do the activities that you've all adopted right now. And then when we're ready to kind of brainstorm on new activities, we'll get those. So these are all great placeholders that absolutely we need to change the slum and blight area and define how we're going to use what activities we're going to define for slum and blight.
So I think this is probably the 10th year we've been doing it, maybe?
Quite a bit, yeah.
It didn't start right away when the committee started. It came in the middle. So it could be the 15th year. I don't remember our very first one. But, maybe now slum and blight goes to another part of the city, and then we have a different way to spend that money. But downtown we've pretty much really fixed downtown, or aided downtown. Our money didn't fix it. It just really incentivized it. So,
Yeah, that question has surfaced a lot. Our new study will help us direct ourselves. Okay, special assessments assistance. Is this you, Nicole?
Yeah, I'm going to kick it off and then ask maybe Tia and Mark to fill in if I miss anything. So as I mentioned I probably should have put this way earlier in the agenda, not when you guys are about done, because it is a pretty serious topic or pretty significant discussion item. As I mentioned last month, we're starting to develop findings on our CDBG administration. That includes special assessment assistance. The special assessment assistance is needing some environmental review components that we have not been doing, and also some reporting on, and then we've been over-reporting on income things. And so luckily we found these items in-house instead of waiting for an audit. And so we're knee-deep in the administration of special assessment assistance. We've been doing special assessment assistance for many years. The good news is it only adds to about $15,000. And so when we look at the pool of money and how we best could use CDBG, $15,000 is a pretty small amount of money. And the amount of paperwork that is required to administer $15,000 is not something that staff recommends to continue to do. And so a response to that is we would like to use our social service funds for special assessment assistance instead. Part of this $45,000 perhaps that maybe in past would have gone to a committee for committee work, use that for special assessment assistance. We would probably look to recommend a policy change, bring that to you all to confirm, bring that to City Commission to confirm. I still need to have some discussions with City Administration, but since we were putting the agenda and packet and our findings were coming together all at the same time, I thought I'd introduce it to you real briefly.
Nicole, do you know what, I think I have the impression that this is on the minds of the folks as they're studying specials too through the task force. There's a special assessment task force, and I get the sense from talking with the mayor and others that they're trying to keep their eye on what the needs are of folks who have trouble meeting their assessments, which could come back to us.
And this doesn't even qualify for a federal project, so we're outside our realm of work.
How does this compare to like homestead tax credit and things that others have for property taxes or for others? Do we have any?
That's out of our wheelhouse.
Okay.
So this is really, a resident has an infrastructure project that meets our national objective for income qualifications. That's it. And then we have to do an environmental review on each of those projects and locations and assessments, and then report their income to determine if they qualify. And so there's many different pieces, and I'm probably over speaking beyond my knowledge skill. This is where Tia, turn to Tia, but in an effort of time, I see the library board queuing up out there. This isn't an activity we should even be doing from our assessment of CDBG.
For the federal funds.
Yeah.
Now, a little example was not necessarily, but for tree removal, we had special assessments, and this committee recently allowed people, you can have up to a several $1,000 assessment for removing a tree inside your yard, your own yard. But I think they give them some breathing room and how many years it takes to pay that. That's one example of how we addressed specials there.
The resident ends up paying for that. It just gets financed into their specials.
Yes. Yeah. So this is a topic that's beginning to bubble up more. We're going to be paying more attention to it. There might be maybe a little bit of relief in our internal funding, but I'm getting this sense. Tia, what else do you have to add to it? Because this is really your turf.
Well, I think Nicole summed it up pretty good. In addition to the environmental reviews, any of these projects that are specially assessed to properties also have to be done with prevailing wages and Davis-Bacon. They have to register in SAMS, and the environmental review is, according to HUD's environmental review, there's a very, very regulatory checklist that some of these projects, even if they had like a phase 1 environmental, may not even be meeting what HUD is requiring. And then there are procurement rules that apply to that too. So like Nicole said, there's a lot of time that goes into it for staff to manage those projects, and it just makes a lot more sense to do it under the the social service fund that she was discussing. And then you don't have to worry about the strings, and it's not an eligible activity under CDBG unless we're doing all those other things. So it actually could come up
So
again.
does our CDBG budget go down if we stop doing this,
No.
or do we switch it to something else?
No, it just gets reallocated into a different activity that's approved by community and then commission.
Yeah, and maybe social service fund, we're just jumping that next step over to social service funds as a potential source. You know, the question could go to the city commission to find the general fund money somewhere else. I think the biggest point we want to bring forward is that this is not an eligible activity that we should be doing anymore. And so then we need to reallocate our efforts on CDBG elsewhere.
Thomas?
One thing I would request as we look at that, and I frankly appreciate that you guys have figured that out before you get an audit.
Yeah,
but-
because we have to go back and do all our other past ones.
But I would want to know what has the impact been of this, and I understand for those that have received assistance, absolutely, it could be life-changing. But from a city standpoint, I don't want to be the guy who seems cold-hearted, but does this make sense for us, the city, to continue to do, or do you just say, nope, we're not going to do it anymore? But at least know, how many have we done in the past 5 years? What has the impact been? What's kind of been like a map of where it's been? Or do you try and focus it on specific areas where you know there is slum and blight? And again, maybe you got to kick the can down the road for about a year. But yeah, those would be at least my questions, is to have just a little bit more information so we know, is this something that we even want to continue?
Okay, anybody else? It's a really hot button topic all around, specials lately, and it's not even on our agenda. All right, any public comment out there? Anybody at all in the audience? Arlette, did you have anything you want to say? Or okay, Mark? Okay, let's go on to any other business.
Mr. Chair, I just had a question that I neglected to ask when we were back on the staff update. If anybody knows, only because it seemed to me to be a beautiful design, the status of the 506 Broadway North rehab and Cowboy Jack coming, have they dropped it entirely, or do we even know, or all we know is that they simply withdrew their request for funding?
From what I understand, they ran into some utility hurdles as well, and so I think, I haven't talked to the applicant lately to understand what all in their due diligence, but I think it's more of a due diligence issue than
It may
anything.
be a delay.
Perhaps,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Arlette, that at least means that you won't have noisy neighbors anytime soon. It means you won't have noisy neighbors anytime soon, it sounds like. Thanks.
Sure. Maybe a couple staff, other business kind of questions. One, we're trying to do two things. One is some sort of city commission brown bag update on the status of CDBG and HUD at some point in the next 60 to 90 days. So look forward to as we kind of schedule that out, as well as the kind of the status of community development, social services, et cetera. Trying to garnish more support and then understanding what other findings might be down the road. And then the second part is I'd like to do, Shar and I have talked about this, being the chair of Planning Commission, but do a joint Planning Commission, Community Development Committee kind of brown bag lunch or something over the course of the next 60 to 90 days. I think would be kind of fun activities as we kind of compare work programs between the two committees. I think would be hopefully time worth your effort.
And, you know, with things like the neighborhood plan coming and stuff, there, it really would fit both of our purviews nicely. And they used to be merged into one commission, I guess, back when. Arlette would know that history, probably. Okay, any other announcements or good business for the good of the order? Not, I really sincerely thank everybody for your participation. I do know, again, we're not just meeting 2, 3, 4 times a year. We're trying to keep this group active and viable and be proactive. So if it gets a little bit much, be honest with me and say, John, you know, hey, we don't have to keep going meeting every single month, but it's something I shoot for. I think there's so much to do, and there's so much groundwork to be laid to do these things. And the staff, it takes time just to get everything on their radar and have the staff to do it. So thank you all sincerely. We'll see you in a month.